Good morning, everybody. Chapter 15 today, Monopoly. So this is our second of the 4 chapters, which we're going to look at different types of markets. You can think of like different types of firms, okay? Last chapter, we did perfect competition. Don't forget, so that's a bunch of little buyers and a bunch of little sellers, more importantly, since we're looking at the firms. We're looking at the sellers, and there's so many of them that none of them have any market power, which means that they're not allowed to change the price, because if they tried to change the price, nobody would buy it from them anymore, right? And the example that kind of I was saying is like a bunch of little identical sellers at a swap meet, all selling the same object, maybe a ShamWow, one of those little chamois things, right? And they all sell the same. Everybody has to sell the exact same price, and basically their profit maximization strategy is just to go wherever their, okay, if this is the price and this is the quantity, and remember they have a marginal cost curve. We learned about the marginal cost curve. Whatever the market price is, right, they just run into their marginal cost curve, and that's how much quantity they should produce, right? And so some interesting things about this is that, about the perfectly competitive, let me write that down actually, perfectly competitive. A couple interesting things about this marketplace is there's a number of small sellers, okay, right? They can't change the price. This means that they're price takers. There's free entry and exit, meaning people can start their companies or they can end their companies at any time that they want. Does this happen in the short run or the long run, though? Who remembers? When can you open a new company? Can you just do it tomorrow? Yeah, right. It's the long run. And then finally, because there's a bunch of small sellers and there's free entry and exit and no one can change the price, well, if any one firm or group of firms is making profit, what's going to happen is that more firms are going to enter and there's going to be 0 long-run profits. Okay, and what kind of profits are we talking about? Economic or accounting profits here? These are economic profits, right? So the firm might still actually be turning a profit in the sense that it gets more revenues than its costs. But when you take into account the implicit costs, or like the opportunity cost of the owner's time or something like that, it ends up being 0 long-run profits, okay? So that's kind of, in a nutshell, perfectly competitive marketplace. Now we're going to go on the complete opposite side of the world and think about monopoly, right? What do you know about monopoly? How many firms are there if there's a monopoly? 1, right? That's actually what that means. Monos is Greek for one, and poleo means to sell. So you have 1 seller, right? So this is the exact opposite of this guy. Does that make sense? This is a bunch of small sellers who cannot change the price. Monopoly is the exact opposite, okay? And so we're going to ask, why are there sometimes monopolies? Why do they arise? Okay. And then this, why is marginal revenue less than price for a monopolist? This is really important. Okay. Remember what marginal revenue is? Marginal revenue. I'm making 10 items, and I go to make my 11th item. How much additional revenue will I get from that one more item? That's what marginal revenue is, right? For a perfectly competitive firm, let's actually put this up here. Marginal revenue was equal to, anybody remember? If a perfectly competitive firm goes and sells 1 more ShamWow, how much revenue do they get for that 1 ShamWow? Whatever the market price is, right? So they could sell as much as they want at the market price, and they don't change, and the market price doesn't change. Okay? That's what's true for a perfectly competitive firm. This, however, is true for a monopolist. And this is probably one of the most important pieces of the chapter that you recognize this difference. Okay? So then we're going to say, how does monopolies do their profit maximizing? Right? So they have to choose a P and a Q. Perfectly competitive firms, they aren't able to choose a P. So if they're trying to maximize profit, the only thing they do is choose a Q. Right? However, monopolists, they can change their price, because there's only 1 seller, okay? So they have what's called market power. That's the opposite of being a price taker. Right? If you're a price taker, you're just told what price to sell at. If you can be a price maker, that's called having market power. Okay, and that is therefore gives them the opportunity to change their price and quantity when they're trying to do profit maximization. Does this make society better off or worse off? Okay. What can the government do about monopolies? Right? Should the government step in? We know currently that in the United States, the government sometimes steps in and breaks up monopolies when they get too large. And then finally, sometimes monopolists engage in this practice known as price discrimination. And how does that affect society if they do price discrimination? Okay, so monopolies. The technical definition, it's the sole seller, the only seller of a product with no close substitutes. So if you want this product, you have to go through this place. Okay. I guess you can think of Apple as a monopolist. They're the only person who sells the iPhone, for example, right? Now, it can be argued that, oh, well, nowadays there are more closer substitutes. A lot of the Android phones are getting, just as good as the iPhone, so maybe they're losing their monopoly power, right? But for a number of years, they definitely had a monopoly over the smartphone market. Okay, so we're going to study monopoly, and then we're going to compare it to perfect competition. The reason why we compare it to perfect competition is because perfect competition always has like the most efficient outcomes. Remember, we saw that when in the long run, perfect competition always produces at the bottom of the ATC curve, meaning the most efficient and the cheapest place. So we can think about perfect competition as like the best scenario for society. Okay, it's the maximum surplus. And every other market structure, we're going to compare back to perfect competition. Oh, okay. All right, beautiful. So the big difference, remember, like I told you, is that a monopoly firm has market power. Okay? That's the opposite of being a price taker here, that you can't change price, right? When you have market power, you can change the price because there's only one of you, right? You could set the price whatever you want it to be. Okay? These guys here, if they try to change the price, the buyers will go to another firm. They won't buy from them anymore. Okay, so why do monopolies arise? Well, the main cause of monopolies are these barriers to entry. Things that mean barriers to entry means that other firms cannot come into the marketplace for some reason. That's the opposite of this condition right here, free entry and exit, right? In the perfect competition world, we have free entry. Anyone can set up a ShamWow shop, right? Not anyone can set up a monopoly for whatever reason. Sometimes the barriers to entry is a single firm owns a key resource. Okay, right? So if you are the only place in the world that maybe has a mine of some rare earth metal or something like that, then you can be a monopoly because you're the only person that owns that mine, right? Nobody else can enter the marketplace because they don't have access to your mine. Okay, so here's another example. De Beers, right? You guys heard of De Beers? They have like more than 90% of the world's diamonds, actually, right? So ever wonder why the price of a diamond is so high, right? There's only one company. They can sell whatever price they want to. Okay. They sometimes have advertisements on TV like "a diamond is forever," I think is their little slogan or something like that, right? So they also engage in a lot of advertising to make people want the diamond, and then they restrict the supply of diamonds a big amount, and then all of a sudden, boom, diamonds are so expensive, right? So that's an example. You and I can't set up a diamond mine because we just don't have a diamond mine, right? Okay. The other thing that often happens, the government gives a single firm the exclusive right to produce the good, okay? So, for example, the water company, the electricity company, right? You and I can't set up a public utility, right? You and I can't set up an electricity company because we have to get permission from the government, and the government has already given it to only one company, okay? And another example is with these things called patents, right? So, say a company invents something, then they get a patent, and for 17 years, in most cases, no one else can produce that product, right? So the government says, okay, you are the only seller of this good, now you have a monopoly. right? And the government does that. The reason why is to reward people who come up with good ideas, right? We want to make people do research that comes up with good ideas because it's best for everybody if people do research that come up with good ideas. So the government gives them a patent for 17 years. They can be a monopoly. They can reap tremendous profits from their product. And then that's their reward. And then after 17 years, then other people can start making it. Okay, and then the price comes down. All right. And the third option is there are some goods that it's just better and cheaper to have one big firm making all of the products, right? If we tried to break it up into a bunch of little firms, then it would be more expensive, okay? And we would get an eraser here. So do you remember that most of the time the ATC curve looks like this? In perfectly competitive firms, we saw the ATC curve looks like this, right? And we learned something. This point right here is an important point because it's the cheapest place for society to be producing this product at, right? And in the long run, we know that in a perfectly competitive firm, in the long run, the price will be equal to the bottom of the ATC, right? Does anybody know what we call that? The amount of quantity they make, which is at the bottom of the ATC? Efficient scale, right? So scale means like how much you produce. Think of scaling up your operation or scaling down, right? And this is the efficient, the best place to make it. It's the cheapest, right? Okay. Now, what happens if, for a second, and this is not going to be a perfectly competitive market, what happens if the ATC curve goes like this? What happens? What's the efficient scale now? Just as much as possible, right? You can't get to the bottom, right? So basically, we want, let's say that this is the maximum amount you could sell. Guess how much we want our firm making? The maximum amount. So in this case, do we want a bunch of little firms making a little tiny bit? Like, do we want a bunch of little firms producing down here at this small Q? No. We actually want only one firm that makes as much as possible. Does that make sense? We call that a natural monopoly. Okay? And so an example, maybe an easy to think of example, would be a power company, right? The electric company builds this big, huge power generation facility. I don't know, like a turbine or a nuclear power plant or something like that, right? And that's a huge fixed cost. And then to connect everybody else up to it, they just have to run some wires out to their house, right? And so the more quantity, the more consumers, the more customers, right? We can spread that giant cost of the power generation facility out over a bunch of customers, and it just gets cheaper for everybody, right? Now imagine that we had just a bunch of different power companies, and they all created, they all built their big, huge processing facilities. Well, one, we would have probably a lot more pollution, and there would just be these big, huge power facilities everywhere. And the other hand, it gets very expensive because now we have to pay for a bunch of really expensive power plants. Does that make sense? Whereas if you just have one big, huge power plant, and then you just run wires to everybody's house, and it's much cheaper that way. That's an example of a natural monopoly. We actually, for the benefit of society, we actually only want one company to be producing. Okay. Okay. So here was the idea that I was just saying with the power plant. So for electricity, the ATC is always downward sloping. You see that? Always downward sloping. Meaning the more people that buy from the power plants, the cheaper, the more we can spread out the cost of that, the giant fixed cost, the giant power plant, right? We can spread it out along to everybody, right? And what's the marginal cost for hooking up an additional consumer? Almost nothing. Maybe a couple feet of copper wire, right, to their house. And then to hook up another customer, just another couple feet of copper wire, right? So it's much cheaper than building a whole new power plant. Okay? So the idea is that we would want all homes, let's say there's 1,000 total homes, we want all of the homes to be serviced by one provider instead of just 2 firms that made 500 each, because if you look at the cost for 500 is higher than the cost for 1,000, right? And remember, when I'm looking at like the ATC curve, I'm not talking about total cost here. I'm talking about, this is the per unit cost. This is like the cost per, I don't know, whatever electricity is measured in, kilowatt hours probably, right? So the cost per unit of production is going down. That's what the average total cost tells you. Okay? Does that make sense about the natural monopoly? So remember, if I say something about a always downward sloping ATC curve, bing, natural monopoly. Those two things go together, okay? All right. Yeah, here you go. There's just some numbers. These are just made up, so they're not really that important. But it's cheaper to have one firm make 1,000 than 2 firms make 500. Okay, so let's think about the demand curves for a monopoly versus a perfectly competitive firm. Okay, so here I draw P and Q for the perfectly competitive firm. Now, in a competitive market, do you remember how last chapter, how I would draw the two demand curves right next to each other, right? And this is the same price but different quantities. This is for one firm, right? And remember, this was for the whole market. Okay? So the demand curve for the whole market slopes downwards. Okay? But the demand curve for only one firm, think about this. I'm a perfectly competitive firm, not a monopoly. Real quick, we're going to put this on the side burner. I show up to set up my little table at the swap meet, and I'm selling a ShamWow, and I can only sell for whatever the market price is. But I can sell as many as I want to, but I can only sell for the market price, right? Am I able to change the price at all? No. So in other words, my personal demand curve, not the demand curve of society, but my personal demand curve that I see as a firm looks like this. Right? I can sell as much quantity as I want, but I cannot change the price. I can be anywhere along here. Okay? I can sell any quantity, but I can't change the price. All right? So we have what's called a horizontal or flat demand curve. Okay? Now, just to give you a reminder, what sets the height of this demand curve? It's this out here. Right? The intersection of supply and demand. That sets the market price. Whoop, my demand curve's not going to be in the right spot. Which then, let's make this accurate. Which, whatever the market price is, that's going to come be my flat demand curve for the individual firm, right? And then, I don't know, if supply or demand in the whole market changes, that's going to change the market price, which is going to change my personal demand curve up or down, but I can't change it as the firm. That happens at the market level, okay? So there's a flat demand curve for the firm. That's why we get this idea, marginal revenue equals price, right? If I'm selling this much product and I decide to sell one more product, I still sell it for P dollars. And so that additional product, the revenue I get from that is called the marginal revenue. It's equal to price, right? Okay. So we can increase Q without lowering P, so marginal revenue equals price, right? It's just what we were saying right here. This is why marginal revenues equal price. That's review from last chapter, okay? We should already know that. But now we got to compare it to monopoly, because it's a little different world here. Okay, so a monopolist, is there a bunch of sellers? No, right? There's only one seller for a monopolist, right? So what's the demand curve that the monopolist is going to see? Well, he's going to see, not this guy, he's going to see the demand curve for the whole marketplace, right? Because he's going to be selling to the whole marketplace. Another way to think about this is these small, perfectly competitive firms are probably only selling like 4 or 5 or 6 units, right? The monopolist is selling thousands of units, so he's a big guy, right? And he's selling much more. And so he's going to sell to the whole marketplace. So in the case of monopolist, this does not exist. Because, yeah, in the case of the monopolist, it's the whole market, but there's also just one firm selling to the whole market. It's called the monopolist. Yeah? So the demand curve that the monopolist sees is the market demand curve, so it is downward sloping. Okay? And let's delete this supply curve for just 1 second, so it's not in our way. Let's say that he's selling this much, Q1, and he wants to sell one more, Q2. Do you see that? What do you know about the price? If I'm going to sell Q1, then I want to sell Q2 now suddenly. I want to sell one more product. I have to charge less, right? Because remember, we're monopolists right now, so we can set a price. This is not the world of perfect competition, right? Back here, I was charging everybody P1 per item. Now, if I want to sell one more, I want to sell Q2 in total, guess what? I have to charge P2 for all products, not just for that last product. Does that make sense? I actually have to lower the price on every single product. You see how that's going on there? Everybody's buying the product from me at the same price. So if I want to just sell one more, I actually have to lower the price, not only for that last product, but for all products, all Q1 products that I had been selling previously, right? So I actually have to lower the price. So let me ask you, is this true? If I go to sell one more, do I get P1? Is my marginal revenue P1? No. My marginal revenue is not equal to P1, right? As a matter of fact, my marginal revenue, what is it? Greater than or less than? It's less than. I get less additional dollars from selling my product. Okay? This is really important to understand. So here we go. Marginal revenue does not equal to price. Marginal revenue is less than price. Now I'll give you guys an example so you can see how that works here in a second. Right? And you look at this. This can kind of kill you, actually. By selling one more, it's not like you just get an extra P2, because you're losing all of the, you know what I mean? From 0 to Q1 products, you were selling them for P1. So say you had to lower the price a whole $1. You're losing out $1 on all of these products, too. You know? You get an extra P2 from this last one, but you lost out on all of this extra price. You might actually be making your revenue go down by selling another product. Okay? All right, let's look at this example so you guys can kind of figure this out. So let's say that there's a cappuccino seller. We'll call them common grounds. Okay? And we have a market demand. So the market demand is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Price 4 all the way down to 150. This follows the law of demand, right? As price goes down, people want more of it. Okay? In real life, right, if this was a monopoly and we expect to have a smooth demand curve, these should be in like the thousands, right? But just to make math easier, we're just going to pretend they're not. It's just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? And I want you to imagine that he's a monopolist. So it means that he can choose any of these price points to sell at, right? If he decides to sell 3, he has to sell them for $3. If he decides he wants to sell them for $2, that means 5 people will buy his product. Okay? So I want you to fill in the missing spaces in the table. Total revenue, average revenue, marginal revenue, right? So total revenue is easy. It's just quantity times price. It goes there. Average revenue is just total revenue divided by however much he sold, right? And then the marginal revenue is just the increase from total revenue from square to square. Okay? So go ahead and figure that out. Take a minute or two. All right, so let's do this. The total revenue, if they sell 0 and it's $4.50 a piece, 0, right? If they only sell one of them for $4, they get 4. If they sell 2 of them for $3.50 a piece, they get 7, 3 of them for $3, 9, and then we get 10, 10, 9. Okay? And so average revenue, meaning how much on average did I get per cappuccino, right? That's what I'm asking. I'm saying, well, I made $4 total for one, so on average I got $4, right? I got $7 total for 2, I got $3.50. I got the customers paid me $9 total for 3, I got $3. You will notice that price equals average revenue at every point. Okay, that was also true in the perfectly competitive marketplace. Price equals average revenue. Okay. Now, marginal revenue. How do I find marginal revenue? Well, it's just the increase in total number of dollars that I get when I sell one more. So when I was selling 0 and then I went to sell 1, I was getting 0 and then I got 4. So the marginal revenue is $4, the difference between 0 to 4. And then when I went to sell 1 more, I got $3 more. You see that? So I put the 3 there. When I went to sell 1 more, I got $2 more. When I went to sell 1 more, I got $1 more. So I put the 1 here. When I went to sell 1 more, I actually got no more extra dollars. So I put 0. And when I went to sell 1 more, I actually got fewer total dollars. This is the total revenue that the guy's making, right? He's actually getting fewer total dollars. So our marginal revenue for that last guy is -1. Okay? So this is kind of crazy. You see that the marginal revenue is always less than the price, right? We had already reasoned it out here. But look, at every point, marginal revenue, okay, it's equal to price here. But at every other point, $3, it's down to 3. It's less than $3.50, right? $2, it's less than $3. Every point, the marginal revenue is always less than the price, or equal to at the very top. It happens to be very equal to it at the top. Okay? So we have that marginal revenue is less than price. For a competitive firm, remember, marginal revenue was equal to price. It's less than price for the monopoly. Okay? Really important to remember that piece. Okay? So it's kind of crazy because this means that, let's say the company just wanted to make more cash. Like, I'm not even talking about profit here. I'm talking about the company says, I just need more revenue. I just need customers to pay me more cash for whatever reason. For example, I have a buddy who works in a bike shop, and his manager, who owns like all of the bike shops, it's like a chain, looks at his store, and he only looks at how many sales that the guy made. He doesn't actually look at how much profit the guy made. So my buddy always tells me, he's like, dude, don't buy anything on Amazon. Just buy it for me. I'll give you whatever the Amazon price is, but I just need it to go through my store so I look like I have a bigger number for revenue, right? Clearly, I'm not helping him out with his profit or anything, but that's what his boss looks at, just the total amount of sales, right? So if this firm, this coffee shop, just wanted to increase its sales, just like my buddy who owns the bike shop. They're like, we just want to look like we're getting more cash from customers, right? They might accidentally be like, oh, well, all we have to do is just sell more product, right? But that's not true. Notice, from 5 to 6, the total amount of cash they get is actually going from 10 to 9. Why is that? What on earth? They're selling more, but they're getting less cash? Why is that? Can they sell it for the same price? No. In order to sell this 6th coffee, they have to drop the price to $1.50. And not just the price for that 6th coffee, right? They have to drop 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to $1.50 also. Does that make sense? They have to drop the price on everybody's coffee to $1.50 to get that 6th coffee sold. Okay? So that's why total revenue is actually going down, and so our marginal revenue is a negative number. Okay? So if for some reason, like my buddy, all he wanted to do was maximize just the amount of cash he got, that's called maximizing revenue. By the way, that does not maximize profit because we haven't even thought about cost yet. But if he just wanted to maximize the amount of cash people are giving him, he would sell either 4 or 5. Right? That's going to maximize revenue. All right, so let's graph this. I went ahead and put the demand curve here, right? Everybody's demand curve, and the marginal revenue curve. Okay. So the demand curve is very easy. It starts at 0, 4.50. So 0, 4.50. And then it goes to 1, $4, 1, $4. And then it goes to 2, 3.50, right? I just graph it just like that. Okay. Now, the marginal revenue curve, again, on tests and in homework, it's important to remember that the marginal revenue, or marginal anything, marginal cost, marginal revenue, that kind of stuff, always goes in between, right? Because the marginal revenue here, this $4, isn't the marginal revenue of having 0 sold or having 1 sold. It's the marginal revenue of going from 0 to 1. Does that make sense? That's why it's in between the two. Okay? So when I graph this $4, where is it going to be? Is it going to be at 0, or is it going to be 1, or is it going to be halfway? It's going to be halfway in between. Right? So you see, I'm going to put it halfway in between. I'm going to put it $4. Because that's the change from going from 0 to 1. You see that? 0 to 1 on the x-axis and the quantity axis. It's a change from going to 0 to 1, and I graph it on the half. When you do this in your homework on the computer, make sure you put them in the right spot like that. Okay? Don't put it at 0 or 1. Put it in halfway. Okay? All right. So what do you know about the marginal revenue curve? Is the marginal revenue curve always under the demand curve? Yeah. Yeah. This is, again, this idea right here. Marginal revenue is less than the price. Now, where do I get the price from? I get the price from the demand curve. That's the definition. So when I say price or when I say demand curve, I mean the same thing. Okay? When I say price or when I say the demand curve, I mean the same thing. But marginal revenue is always less than price, except for at one point. I guess if you theoretically imagined it going all the way here, it would connect right at the same spot. Okay? So the easy way to draw a marginal revenue curve is just to get the demand curve and then start at the same spot, but then draw something twice as steep. Okay? The marginal revenue curve is actually always exactly twice as steep as the price. Okay? I won't prove this to you why, because I only need calculus, and you don't need calculus for this class, so we'll just forget it. Just take my word for it. The marginal revenue curve is always twice as steep as the demand curve. Okay? But it starts at the exact same spot. That's the easy way to draw the marginal revenue curve. And the marginal revenue is really, really important. Because every time we do the profit max, who remembers the profit max condition? Again, I write pi for profit because the letter P is already taken. The profit maximizing condition. Remember how we imagine profit max? I'm selling 10 products. I'm going to sell one more. What's the marginal revenue that I get for it? And if it's greater than the marginal cost, I should go ahead and sell that product, right? And I keep doing that until they're equal, right? And then I'm at my maximizing profit point. So the profit maximizing condition is marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? This is true for all market structures. Right? This is always true. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's just how I maximize profit no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing. I always have to make sure this is true. Right? Now, the marginal revenue, this is that little weird thing. Sometimes it's equal to price, right? Sometimes marginal revenue is less than price, whatever. But I've got to make sure that this is true. Okay, that's my profit maximizing condition for the rest of this class, and always. Okay? All right. So let's understand the monopolist marginal revenue. So why does it go down faster than the demand curve? Well, I've kind of been leading to this. So if I sell Q, if I sell more Q, right? If I'm selling, I don't know, 10 coffees and I decide to sell an 11th coffee, what happens to my revenue? Well, there's two effects. First is the output effect. If I sell another coffee, I get more dollars. Higher output raises revenue, right? If I sell another coffee, some additional person is going to hand me money over the counter. That's called the output effect. But what's the other thing that I know? In order to sell another coffee, what did I have to do to the price? I had to lower the price. And not just on that last coffee. I had to lower the price on all of my coffees that I sold. We'll call that price effect. I have to lower the price. Right? So, which wins? That's kind of the question, right? Which of these wins? Because one of them is making more revenue, one of them is making less revenue. Okay? So, remember, to sell a larger quantity, the monopolist must reduce the price on all of the units it sells, not just the last unit. Okay? And that's why the marginal revenue is less than the price. Okay? I know I'm going over this like a million times, but don't forget, I did say that this was probably one of the most important concepts to learn in this chapter. Because once you know this, then the monopolist is almost identical to the perfectly competitive market. So if you just learn how to do profit max over in the perfect competitive side, and then just add this one little piece to it, then all of a sudden, boom, you'll have the monopolist. Okay? Okay. So notice the marginal revenue can even be negative when what? The price effect that's lowering revenue is more than the output effect. And you remember back in that practice problem that we did, when we went from 5 to 6, our revenue actually went from 10 to 9, so our marginal revenue was -1. Okay? The marginal revenue is -1. And I'm actually going to go back to the graph here in a second and show it to you guys. Okay. Check this out. Whoops. Check this out. The demand curve can never be negative. That would mean that people are paying, no, that the company is paying you money to buy their product. That would never work, right? The demand curve can't be negative. But look at this. The marginal revenue curve is clearly in the negative zone. You guys see that? It's in the negatives. That means that if I go from 5 to 6, I'm actually losing $1. That means if I tried to go from 6 to 7, I would actually lose $2 of total revenue. Okay? So this guy can definitely be in the negative zone, and it frequently is. Okay? All right. So that's this little piece right here. Marginal revenue can even be negative. Okay, now let's do profit maximization for this monopolist. What's the profit maximizing condition? Right here. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This is not just for monopolists, this is for every single type of firm. It's always this. This is just the easy way to think about profit maximization, right? So, like every other type of firm, including competitive firms, the monopolist maximizes where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay? So, once he identifies this quantity, so marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that just tells me the Q. Right? And then once I find the Q, then I have to find a P. We didn't have to find a P for the perfectly competitive firm because the perfectly competitive firm didn't get to choose a P. All he got to choose was the Q. Okay? And so how do you find the P, the price? Remember what I told you earlier? When I'm talking about price, I'm talking about the demand curve. Right? The demand curve tells you the maximum price that the consumers are willing to pay for any quantity. Okay? All right. So let's put the costs on a graph, just like this. Okay? So I'm going to have the demand curve. I'm going to put the marginal cost curve. Remember this guy? And I'm going to put the marginal revenue curve. So these are all per unit costs and per unit revenues, right? We're talking about per product. I had the demand curve, and then how did I draw the marginal revenue curve? Remember, I just start at the same spot as the demand curve, and I draw something twice as steep. Okay? So it's pretty easy to draw the marginal revenue curve once you have the demand curve. Okay? All right, so where does marginal revenue equal marginal cost? That's the first step, right? Where's marginal revenue equal marginal cost? Bing, right there, right? This is economics. Anytime you see two lines cross, you should get excited, okay? This is all we do in economics, is cross lines. Okay, so marginal revenue equal marginal cost is right there. And so that's how much quantity he's going to make. Because this guy right here. Right? But now, what price will he charge for that quantity? Now here's a new step, because for the perfectly competitive firms, we didn't change the price. They can't change the price. Monopolists can change the price. What price is he going to charge? Is he going to charge this price here? Well, he could, but he'd be crazy. Because what do I know about the customers? Here's what I know about the customers, right? At Q products, they will pay up to that many dollars. Does that make sense? So really, in order to find the price, I go up to the demand curve and then I find the price. And then I find the price. Okay. So now I have the equilibrium point, or the profit maximizing point. It's this guy right here. He sells Q products and he sells them for P dollars. And since he's the only seller in the whole marketplace, guess what? What's the total amount of products sold? Q dollars. Okay? Because he's the only seller in the marketplace. So not that hard. It's not that bad. Okay. Let me throw in the ATC curve here at this point. So I throw in the ATC curve. Remember, the marginal cost curve always crosses the ATC at the lowest point. Right? At the lowest point. So look at this firm. His ATC, if I look at, he's making Q quantity and he's selling for P dollars. How much is it costing him per unit? Boom, that's what the ATC curve tells me, right? The average total cost per unit is right here. So is he making a profit or making a loss, this monopolist? Yeah, he's making a profit. He's making a profit, right? So it equals the distance between price and the average total cost times quantity. Right? This is how much he's making per product, per unit, and he's selling Q units. So that's his profit. Graphically, it's the area of this rectangle right here. Now, I want you to, at this point, if you can't remember perfectly how this looks like in the perfectly competitive firm, go back and look at the perfectly competitive firm, chapter 14, because it's really important to notice the difference. In the perfectly competitive firm, the demand curve is flat, right? We have almost a graph that looks almost like this, but a perfectly competitive firm is flat. The demand curve is flat. And then, in the long run, remember, something happens and then the profits go to zero because other firms join. Well, for the monopolist, are other firms going to join and drive profits down to zero? No, right? No, because there's only one firm. Okay. So this means that if a monopolist is making profits, it can make profits even in the long run. It can just keep making profits. Does that make sense? Perfectly competitive firms are going to make zero profits always. Okay. In the long run. They might make profits like for the next couple of days or something like that. But a monopolist can make profits in the short run and the long run. Okay, here's something interesting. The monopoly does not have a supply curve. Remember, for the perfectly competitive firm, what is his or her supply curve? For the perfectly competitive firm, let's draw this here. This is perfectly competitive firm. Remember their marginal cost curve? If somebody says, hey, you can sell for P1, they say, okay, I'll sell Q1 products, right? If someone says, hey, you can sell for P2, they say, hey, I'll sell Q2 products, right? So the listing of all of the amount of quantities they're willing to sell at any price is this guy right here, right? And so his marginal cost curve is his supply curve, right? The perfectly competitive firm. His marginal cost curve is his supply curve. Now, with one caveat, if it gets below AVC, does the guy sell it all? No. Remember, he turns his factory to zero, right? So this part, not part of the supply curve. But every part of his marginal cost curve above the AVC is his supply curve, okay? So that's how you find the supply curve for the perfectly competitive firm. A monopolist, however, does not have a supply curve. So that's a little interesting. Watch this. So the competitive firm, remember, it takes the price as given, and then it goes to the marginal cost curve, and it tells you how much quantity it's going to produce. That's this right here. Right? But a monopolist, does anyone tell the monopolist how much they can sell their product for? No. The monopolist is the opposite. The monopolist he tells the world how much he's going to sell his product for, right? It's the opposite when you're a monopolist. Okay, so we'll call that a price maker. Another way to say that is he has market power. It means the same thing. Market power, price maker, right? Nobody tells the monopolist how much to sell for. He tells the world, right? So the quantity does not depend on price, right? How does he find his quantity and price? He looks at where marginal revenue and marginal costs are crossing, right? So the monopolist sets quantities and prices together and then tells the world what it's going to be. So there's no supply curve for the monopolist. Okay. Yeah, no supply curve for the monopolist. All right, let's do a problem where we're going to ask, how is social welfare, how is society doing if I have a monopolist selling a product versus if I have a perfectly competitive marketplace? And so the example we're going to look at is in drugs, right? Let's say that some drug company comes up with a new drug for, I don't know, some sickness, for your allergies or something like that. What's the first thing that they do? They go get a patent for that drug, right? And then that company is the only one that can sell that drug, right? Have you ever gone to the store and tried to get your prescription filled, and they're like, oh, there's no generic available for this product or something like that, and it's like 10 times more expensive? That's because the patent hasn't expired yet, right? For 17 years, let's say the drug company is called Pfizer or something like that, right? They'll make a drug, and then for 17 years, they're the only one who can sell it. And then after 17 years, remember what happens? The patent expires and anyone else can sell it. And we call those generic drugs, right? They just make the drugs, okay? So if you've ever gone to the pharmacy and they're like, oh, there's no generics available, that's because you're in that 17 years and the drug patent hasn't expired yet, okay? So during that 17 years, it's a monopoly, right? And then when that patent expires in 17 years, it turns into perfect competition. Does everybody see that? So this is kind of cool. We can look at one product and it changes from being monopoly to perfect competition, which is exactly what we're studying. Okay, so let's look at that. So let's say that this is the market for a typical drug. We have a demand curve, right? And then I have a marginal revenue curve, which starts at the same spot as the demand curve and has a slope twice as steep. And then just to make the world a little bit easier, I just made the marginal cost curve flat. Normally our marginal cost curve looks like what? It slopes upwards, right? But if some way we're just going to imagine that every pill costs, I don't know, $1 to produce, no matter how many you produce of them, right? If I'm making 10,000 pills and I decide to make one more pill, it costs $1. If I'm making 10 million pills and I decide to make one more pill, it costs $1. Let's just make that assumption. We have a flat marginal cost curve, okay? Oops. So let's do in the 17 years, right? In the patent time, when it's still protected, the drug company is a seller, is a monopoly, right? So where is he going to set his price and quantity? Well, that's simple. How does that all monopolists do? They look at where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal to each other, right? They just look at where marginal revenue and marginal cost cross. They go down and they make a quantity. Let's call that QM, for quantity that a monopoly makes. Okay? And so then what price does he set? Well, he doesn't set this price. He says, well, if I'm going to sell QM products, the maximum amount I can charge is, boom, the demand curve, which is where we get the price. He's going to sell it for PM, the monopoly price. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's going to be the price of the drug, and that's going to be how much is sold. Now, a couple years go by, right? Well, I don't actually want to show you all the things yet, but a couple years go by, and the patent expires. Then what happens? It becomes perfectly competitive marketplace, right? And so if you remember in the perfectly competitive marketplace, right? So perfectly competitive, they also do marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Everybody does marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? But for perfectly competitive marketplace, what does marginal revenue equal to? Exactly, it equals to price. If I sell one more, I get price, right? So I can go ahead and substitute this into there. Everybody see? And I'm going to get what? Price equals marginal cost, right? So this is the profit max condition for perfect competition, right? It's just a special, this is just a special version of this one. This one's always true. This guy's just a special version of it that's only valid for perfectly competitive firms. But we can use this, okay? Tell me on that graph where this is true. Price is equal to marginal cost. Where on this graph is it true? So you can see the marginal cost. When is it equal to price? What do I mean by price? I'm talking about which curve? No, there's no supply curve on there. Where do I get the price from? Demand curve, right? That tells me how much people are willing to spend, right? So I get the price from the demand curve. So this is true where? Boom. Where price is equal to the demand curve, or where marginal cost is equal to the demand curve. That's where price is equal to marginal cost. Does that make sense? So suddenly, when the market becomes competitive, we have these things that we call generic drugs. That means when the marketplace has turned into perfectly competitive. It used to be monopoly, now it's perfectly competitive. And they're going to sell here. They're going to sell at this price, and they're going to sell at this quantity. Does that make sense? So when the patent expired, when the generic people came, that is to say, when the marketplace turned into a perfectly competitive marketplace, what happened to the price? It fell, right? The price was up here and it fell to there. What happened to the quantity? How is society doing? Are they better off now or worse off now? They're better off, right? More people can get the drug and they can get it for cheaper, okay? And that's why if you go to the pharmacy and they're like, we're sorry, there's no generics available yet, that means they're going to have to charge you this price, right? Then when you do get the generics, they're charging you this price. That's why it's cheaper. Does that make sense? Kind of cool. Okay, so let's think more about this. How is society doing? We're going to talk about the welfare cost. Remember, welfare in this class, how people are doing, right? So we know that in the competitive market equilibrium, what's true? Price equals marginal cost. Price equals marginal cost. And the other thing we know about perfectly competitive is it's like the best possible outcome, right? How do we measure that? We say that total surplus is maximized. What's total surplus? Consumer surplus plus producer surplus, right? The happiness in their hearts that's left over from participating in the marketplace. Right? Everybody's as happy as possible. However, in the monopoly equilibrium, price is much higher than marginal cost, right? I can draw this out. It helps you guys. Here's a demand curve. Here's the marginal revenue curve. Here's the marginal cost curve. Here's the price of monopoly. Here's the quantity of monopoly. Here's the perfectly competitive price. And here's the perfectly competitive quantity, right? Let's delete this because it's not necessarily perfectly competitive anymore. In the perfectly competitive equilibrium, the price is equal to the marginal cost, and it's here. And we're good. In the monopoly equilibrium, we're actually here, and the price is much higher than marginal cost, because this is the marginal cost curve, right? That's what I got here. Price is much higher than the marginal revenue equals marginal cost point. Okay? So this means that at this point, the value to buyers, which we take, how much do buyers care about the product? We take it from the demand curve, is much higher than the cost it costs to make this, right? So from a society level, pretend you're not the monopolist right now and you're not caring about maximizing profit. You care about society, right? Anytime people care about the product up high, up here, right? And the product only costs down here to produce, I should make that product. Everybody see? There's going to be happiness left over in society. Look, I value the product at this point. It only cost me this high to make it. So there's this much of a difference in value. If we made that product, that person would be happy, right? And we should make this product, and we should make that product. We should make the product all the way to QC, the perfectly competitive outcome, right? That's what the C is for competitive, okay? That's why society is maximum happiness at the perfectly competitive outcome. With the monopoly outcome, though, we have all of this, like, I don't know, it's like a dead weight loss, right? We're not capturing this happiness that the people would have, okay? So the idea here is the value to buyers of an additional unit, I get that from the demand curve, the price, is more than what it costs to make the product. Anytime someone wants it more than it costs to make it, we should make it, but we're not doing that, okay? So the monopoly quantity is too low. If what you're thinking about is making society better off. Does that make sense? This is a great quantity if all you care about is maximizing profit, which is what the monopolist cares about. But if what you care about is making society better off, this number is way too low. It needs to be up here at QC. Okay? So monopoly, we get this thing called the deadweight loss again, right? And it's right here. It's all of this leftover happiness that people want to buy the product for, and they want it more than even it costs, but they don't get the product. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the welfare cost of monopoly. We'll put the demand curve and we'll put a marginal cost curve here, traditional upward sloping marginal cost curve. For one firm, the marginal cost curve is his supply curve, right? So this kind of looks like a supply and demand curve. Okay, where's the competitive equilibrium going to be found? In perfectly competitive, what's the special profit max condition for perfectly competitive? What is it? Remember? Price equals marginal cost, right? So where are they going to be? This is very simple. There's only one place on this graph where the lines cross. Right here, right? Okay. So price, we get the price from the demand curve. Marginal cost, we get it from here. So the competitive equilibrium will be right here. QC. And the price will be PC up here, which is equal to the marginal cost. But where's the monopoly equilibrium going to be? We're missing a curve to be able to find the monopoly. What do I need to add in there to find the monopoly? The marginal revenue curve, okay? So let's go ahead and throw in the marginal revenue curve right here. You see that? It's easy to draw. You started at the same place the demand curve starts, and you make it twice as steep. Okay? Now you tell me where the monopolist will produce at. QM, how will I find it? MC equals MR. Okay, so I'm going to put that down there. And how much will the price be? You go up to the maximum price they can charge, and then it's PM. Okay, so we'll call this the monopoly price. We'll call this right here the perfectly competitive price. Notice price is much higher than marginal cost. So look at this triangle right here. That's where you find the deadweight loss. That's where you find the deadweight loss. Why is that a deadweight loss? Well, I want the monopolist to actually sell more. I want him to sell QC. Why? Because for all of these products from QM to QC, the cost of making the product is down here. The benefit to society is up here. So at any one of these points, society would be happier if we made this, right? People want it more than it costs. But the monopolist doesn't want to sell that many. Who knows why the monopolist doesn't want to sell that many? It's because it's not a maximizing profit point. And the reason is, it's this, remember that pesky downward sloping demand curve? If they were going to sell more than QM, what do they have to do to the price? They have to lower the price, right? And they can't just lower the price on one product. They have to lower the price on all of their products, right? So they're like, no, we're going to lose out on our profit if we do that, okay? That's why the monopolist doesn't want to sell those extra products, because they have to drop the price too far. Okay. All right. But let's now imagine that we do let the monopolist charge different prices, right? Because over here the problem was the monopolist can only charge one price to everybody, P, and he doesn't want to lower the price, okay? Let's let the monopolist change prices. Now this does not happen a lot, so you kind of have to put on your imagination hat here, okay? Because normally, whatever the company is, it sells its product, it just sets its price, right? But let's imagine that we allow them to change prices. We're going to call that price discrimination, okay? So where does that come from, right? Discrimination is anytime you treat people differently based on some characteristics, right? Generally, we think of discrimination as a bad thing, right? Oh, you're whatever, you're this color, so I'm going to treat you differently than if I would if you were a different color, or something like that, right? But price discrimination, maybe not a negative thing, even though it's called discrimination. It just means you look at a different person and you sell them a different product. Same product, different price. Okay? Price discrimination is only price discrimination if it's the same product at a different price when it's a different person. Okay? There's some questions on your homework about this. So tuition would kind of be like that. Absolutely. How is tuition the same product, different price, different people? Out of state, in state? Lower income, higher income gives you different amounts of financial aid? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great example. Tuition is a good example of price discrimination. Okay? And so really, how much do you want to charge people? Well, you want to charge them the maximum amount that they're willing to pay, right? If you're a smart monopolist, right? You're like, okay, this guy will pay $50 for this pair of shoes. This guy's only going to pay $10 for the pair of shoes. Guess what? I'll sell this guy the shoe for $50, and I'll sell this guy the shoe for $10. Then I maximize my profit, right? Okay, so we can actually increase profit by charging the higher price to buyers who are willing to pay more. WTP, willingness to pay. So this is kind of cool. And it gets over this deadweight loss problem. Okay. So let's look at this. The opposite of price discrimination is called a single price monopoly, right? So a monopolist who only charges one price, that's what we've learned about so far, right? How does he do it? The single price monopolist who can only charge one price to everybody, that's called single price, he just goes marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right there. He finds the quantity, and then he goes up and he finds the price. And this is the price that he pays to everybody, that he charges to everybody, right? Now, remember, we actually want him to sell here, right? This is the good place to sell. Every time the people's willingness to pay is higher than what it costs to make the product, we wish he would sell here, but he won't. Why won't he sell there? Because then he has to lower the price below the monopoly price, right? But what if we said to the monopolist, hey, you can charge different people different prices. You can charge this guy PM, right? But if you want to sell this product, you can sell it for a little bit less. And if you want to sell this product, you can sell it for a little bit less. And if you want to sell to this guy down here, you can sell it for even more. Okay? We're going to call that price discrimination. So if somehow the monopolist could look at the guy or the customer and be like, your WTP is $45, I'm charging you $45, right? He's going to do it. So how much would he sell? So the single price monopoly, right? PM and QM. But now imagine we let the monopolist charge a different price to every person. How much would he sell now? He would sell all of it. This is where we want him to sell, right? Because on this guy, how much profit is he making? Barely any, but that's fine. It's better than zero, right? And this guy, how much is he making? Barely any, but that's fine. It's better than zero, right? So go back to the world of the consumer. Go back to the world of the single price monopoly, right? When he only can sell QM and he can only sell everybody the same price. There's the consumer surplus. There's the producer surplus. We'll call it monopoly profit. And what was this guy called right here? Do you remember? Deadweight loss. Okay. That's with just one price. But now let's imagine we let the guy, the monopolist, sell at a different price to every person. Okay? Suddenly, like you guys said, he's going to sell here now. He's not going to sell here at QM, right? He's going to sell at the point we want him to because he can charge a different price for each person. So he's just going to charge a different price for each person. And then it's called perfect price discrimination. So how does it look over here? Well, he turns this entire thing into his profit. Is there any consumer surplus at all anymore? No, right? Because what's the consumer surplus? It's like the happiness left over in my heart from the difference in what I was willing to pay versus what I had to pay. Well, the monopolist charges you exactly what you're willing to pay, so you have no consumer surplus, but he has maximum profit. Okay? But, so that's kind of a weird thing. The monopolist just turned into makes a huge amount of profit. But what's the good thing? What do you notice is not here anymore? Deadweight loss, right? And so you can think, right? It was a problem because before, remember all these people from QM to QC didn't get a product at all, even though they wanted one? Well, at least now they get the product. Does that make sense? At least now they get the product. So overall, for society overall, when we both consider the monopolists, the firm, and the buyers, the consumers, for society overall, we're better off with the perfect price discrimination, right? The buyers are a little bit worse off maybe, but at least everybody who wanted the product got the product. And the monopolist over here is making all kinds of money. Okay? So we call that perfect price discrimination. Perfect price discrimination. It's when the monopolist knows everybody's WTP perfectly. Kind of probably not realistic, right? How can a monopoly know what your willingness to pay is? It's kind of difficult. The only company who knows what everybody's willingness to pay is eBay, right? They're geniuses. They could do this. They're the only people who ever said, you don't actually have to pay this amount for it, but what's the maximum amount you would be willing to pay for this product, right? And when you go to bid, you just put your bid. It's your highest amount you're willing to pay. You don't actually have to pay that. You pay whatever the bid ends up being, but they've just convinced us all into telling them their WTP. So eBay could do this. That's the only company that I know that could do that. Okay. All right. So there's no deadweight loss. I mean, the monopoly profit goes up. I mean, if you're anti-firm, I guess you're maybe not super happy about this, but society overall is better off. Okay. So in the real world, regular companies can't do perfect price discrimination. So they just maybe do a couple of different prices. You've probably seen this, right? Not every firm knows every buyer's WTP. Most buyers don't tell. You don't walk into some place and be like, I see your bicycle is on sale for $1,000. I would be willing to pay up to $1,600, right? Nobody actually tells that to the firms. So basically what firms do is they divide customers into groups and then just charge the groups different prices. Now you've seen this, right? So here's an example. Movie tickets, right? You can go to a movie ticket, you go buy your movie and you can buy with your student discount. If you have a student ID, you get a student discount, right? Or if you're a senior, you get a senior discount. Or if you go on weekday afternoons, those are called matinees, right? They're cheaper. Why are they doing this? Not because they care about you, right? It's because of this. If they just charged everybody one price, it would be PM. But then there would be all of these people down here who would be missing out on a movie ticket. And the movie theater would be missing out on their profit, right? So if they say, I bet all of these guys would buy the ticket if I would sell it to them at a lower price, then we'd still at least get a little bit of profit, right? And that's what they're doing. So the movie theater is making the assumption, or is imagining, that these people along down here who wouldn't normally buy the ticket at the higher price, okay, we're going to call them seniors or students or people with no jobs, because then they can go in the middle of the week, right? And it's a reasonable idea, right? People without jobs, like students, those of us with lower incomes, are not going to be able to pay that high price. So chances are we probably wouldn't see the movie at all, right? So you can go, you lower the price, and they can capture some of the people in this range. Okay, that's the idea right there. Airline, right? Who's willing to pay more, business travelers or pleasure travelers? Business travelers, right? Because guess what? If I'm a business traveler, am I paying for my airline ticket? No, my company is, right? So I'll buy an expensive ticket. It doesn't matter to me, right? So if you buy an airline ticket where you have a Saturday night stayover, then they know you're not a business traveler. Because business travelers, what? They go and they come back in the same week, right? They fly out on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and they come back on Thursday or Friday. They don't want to be gone. They don't work over the weekend. So if you can say on a Saturday night stayover, that generally kind of helps you realize that the airline that you're not a business traveler, and they know that the business travelers are down here. They have high WTPs. The pleasure travelers are down here. They have lower WTPs. So in order to capture some of these people, they need to offer them cheaper fares. Okay. Here's another one. Discount coupons, right? Coupons to go to the store. The idea here is, if you're willing to go through the silly newspaper and cut out all those silly coupons, you must be down here, right? And so you wouldn't probably buy the product anyway. We already had this one. You guys thought it up very smartly, right? College. They charge totally different prices to different people for college. In-state, out-of-state, financial aid. So they offer this. All of these, remember, all of these examples are same product, different price when it's a different person. That's the definition of price discrimination. Okay? These are not perfect price discrimination, because remember, perfect price discrimination means you can tell every single person what they're willing to pay, and then you charge them that amount. This is just like dividing people in like 2 or 3 groups, right? So this is non-perfect price discrimination. Okay. Another one is quantity discounts, right? You get to pay less if you buy in bulk. If you buy a big number, you get to pay less. A movie theater charges $4 for a small pop. You ever notice this? Drives me crazy, right? You can pay for like a little tiny solo styrofoam cup of popcorn, you pay $4, and then you pay like $4.05, and you get like a trash bag full, right? It's a little ridiculous. That obviously the prices are not equated with the cost to the movie theater, right? What are the prices changed like that for? It's because they are trying to capture some of these people over here, so they're going to charge them a lower price. Okay. All right. So what should the government do, real quick? Because we saw that, in general, monopolies are not so good for the society, right? Why? Because they have this deadweight loss problem. Remember, this is our nice, perfectly competitive outcome. This is our monopoly outcome, and we have this deadweight loss. Now, we can get rid of some of the deadweight loss with price discrimination, but it's hard still, right? The monopolists can't always do price discrimination. So we've got this pesky deadweight loss that we don't really want to have. If I could force the monopoly to act like a perfectly competitive firm, that would be the best, right? If I could just force the monopoly to sell for the perfectly competitive price and sell the perfectly competitive quantity, that would be the best for society, right? Can I do that? Can the government do that? Well, one thing that they try to do is they have these laws called antitrust laws. You guys heard of the antitrust legislation? What they basically do is they break up companies that get too big, or if companies are becoming monopolists and they're like shutting down their other firms, they sue the company or something like that. And they try to increase competition. So what does that do? It changes the marketplace from a monopoly marketplace to a competitive marketplace. Okay? So it turns it into a competitive marketplace. Okay? So just a couple of you guys don't really have to know these super well, but just know that they're on the books. The Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, the Clayton Act in 1914 allowed the government to pursue people who were becoming monopolies. Okay? Just because it's not as good for society. All right. The other option they have is regulation. So, the government can come in and be like, I know you want to choose PM, monopoly price, but guess what? You're going to charge the perfectly competitive price, right? That's an idea. The problem, though, is that for natural monopolies, the marginal cost is lower than the ATC at all quantities. So if you try to make them, here, look at this. Let's add on this. Let's make this a natural monopoly by putting in an ATC curve. Right? Here's the ATC curve. It's always falling, right? This monopolist, if we allow him to be a monopolist, guess what he's doing? He's making a little bit of profit, right? But if I come in and I force him to charge a perfectly competitive price, which is marginal cost, right? That's what we'll call this marginal cost pricing. That's when price equals marginal cost. What do you see? If I forced him to charge this amount, this is his costs. What do you know about that company? His cost is higher than the price he's able to sell it for. That's called he's making a loss, right? So I would accidentally put this company out of business if it's a natural monopoly. You guys see that? I would accidentally, the government would come in and put this out of business. So this is risky, because how do you know what the company's average total cost curve is? The government doesn't know what a company's average total cost curve is. They might accidentally put them out of business. So another thing they could try to do is they could say, all right, you don't have to charge marginal cost. You can just charge whatever your average total cost is, right? And so then we would be right here, right? So the demanders are willing to pay this much, and the average total cost is here. So they make zero profit. It's not as good as the perfectly competitive equilibrium, but it's certainly better than the monopolist equilibrium. Okay, you could try to do that. Another thing you could do is turn the monopoly into a public utility, where all the profits that the monopoly makes ends up going back to the people anyway. So maybe that's a way to kind of break it up. U.S. Postal Service, which incidentally hasn't made a profit in years, so maybe this is not a great idea. But the idea here was, right, we're going to allow the mail service to be a monopoly, but we'll just say that the people own it, so that any profits get channeled back to the people, right? Now, what do we know about the U.S. Postal Service? How well is it doing? It's on the verge of going under every single year. So the big issue here is that it's just a really wasteful organization, the U.S. Post Office. Because when a company is going to be able to keep its own profits, guess what it does? It lowers its costs, right? It gets to be a really good, efficient company, right? But if the company just has to give all its profits away, then it's like, why am I going to try to make profits anyway, right? So they just become a wasteful organization, right? And they just waste a lot of money. Okay. Yeah. The other option is it could do nothing. The government could, right? Why do I even put this on here? It's because everything you can imagine that a monopolist that you could do to kind of fix a monopolist might accidentally mess it up, right? As much of a bummer it is that firms charge super high monopoly prices for, let's say, the drugs when they come out with a new drug, they charge super high monopoly prices. As much of a bummer that is, eventually the drugs come into the regular competitive marketplace, and then everybody ends up benefiting, right? And if I were to accidentally shut down that company before it had even made the drug because I didn't want to make too much profit, then I wouldn't have the drug in the first place, right? So doing nothing might actually be the best policy in some cases. Okay, some cases. All right, so basically, in conclusion, pure monopoly is rare where there's only one seller and 0 other people, but there's a lot of firms that have the ability to change their price. We'll call that market power, right? Because they sell something that's unique, and so they're almost the only seller selling this thing, right? Or they just are really huge, and there are very few other competitors, right? It basically looks like a monopolist because they're basically the only ones selling something. And so you can still use all the monopoly ideas on those kind of firms, including the price is higher than marginal cost, there's a deadweight loss with these companies.